Okay, I'm going to jump in, everybody, and I'm going to start by looking at the normal spreadsheet that we take a look at when I run the call. And before we do that, I'm just going to say what I'm going to end up talking about today is these two competing things that are happening in the housing market. And it's going to kind of feel like maybe like a basic economics lesson, but basically, for a while now, we've had high interest rates as an effort to calm down price increase. Okay, so the context of this is that one of these two competing things. Number one is that we had 2 years in a row of really rapid price increase. And so a little over a year ago, the federal government allows interest rates to go up the fastest and most that they had gone up in a long time in an effort to try to calm that price increase in the housing market. Okay. One thing to keep in mind about that, though, is that they weren't just trying to make houses more affordable. They were trying to calm inflation, which is a factor that touches everything that we buy, right? They were trying to calm housing price increase, but they were also trying to calm inflation. The second competing factor here is transaction count, unit count, the number of houses that are trading hands. And most of you probably understand economics enough to be able to answer what happens in a marketplace if something causes the price, the capacity of a buyer to purchase to go down. Well, it's gonna take some of them out of the marketplace. So on one hand, federal government's trying to calm price increase by letting rates go up. On the other hand, what that then is doing is it's taking some buyers out of the marketplace, which will lower transaction count, right? So it's like they succeeded in lowering the price of homes, but high interest rates have not in any way succeeded in making homes more affordable. As of right now, they've actually made them less affordable for most consumers. Y'all follow that? Interest rates being high have accomplished what the federal government tried to do, which was calm price increase, which helps keep inflation down. But interest rates being in the mid to high sevens has had a negative impact on affordability, particularly for the median buyer. Because prices haven't gone down, they've just slowed. So they're still going up, but much slower than they were for 2 years prior. But if price increase only slows down moderately and interest rates are triple what they were, a house is notably less attainable right now. So they didn't help affordability. They did help slow price increase. Okay, so that's the context. I'm going to share my screen. We got one really big interesting factor here in this chart that I look at. So reminder, again, this is only single family homes in the city of Indianapolis. I just used this data point as a reference to what's happening more largely in central Indiana so that the numbers are a bit more manageable. So single family homes in Indianapolis, here's our key data point for today. So this is actively listed single family homes in the city of Indianapolis going back to the start of the year. The highest that number has been was July 25th. It reached 1,638. It got as low as just over 1,000 in March. Now, this is fairly normal that you would see inventory creep up. So it normally bottoms out somewhere in like the March, April, maybe May, right? So because that's when there's so much buying activity that the inventory doesn't tend to get high. And then from somewhere in May or June through the end of the year, oftentimes even through January, inventory will go up. Buying activity cools. So inventory starts to go up. So that's fairly normal. However, y'all take a look, just looking at this one data point, you can see that over the course of this year, and this would be true if we went back 2.5 years, maybe even 3 years, to see a jump of nearly 500 houses in how many are actively for sale in the city of Indianapolis, that's a total outlier, totally abnormal. And I think a lot of us are seeing and feeling and experiencing this, particularly those of you that have some houses listed for sale that a year and a half ago would have had multiple offers, right? And you're sitting at 20, 30, 40, 50 days on market saying, what is going on? This is particularly true. So where a lot of this inventory increase is coming. Rex highlighted this last week. I appreciate the way that he was looking at this data, and I think he's spot on. This is particularly true of median priced inventory. So think about this, connecting this to what I shared at the beginning of the call. So put your economic hat back on. If interest rates are the primary factor doing this to the marketplace, do y'all see how high interest rates have more of an impact on the median consumer? Somebody buying a $300,000 house, for example, or a $350,000 house, perhaps, that person is much more likely to be impacted by interest rates being in the high sevens than someone buying, say, a house at double the median. So imagine a $350,000 buyer and a $700,000 buyer. The $700,000 buyer has a couple things in their favor where interest rates don't impact them nearly as much. Number one, they're more likely to have a lot of cash. So they might be able to financially mitigate the cost of the interest rate by just putting more money down, right? They probably are selling a house, therefore have this big pile of cash, equity from the old house. They might be able to put a higher percentage down. Number two, that person's also more likely to understand and have the capacity to play the refi game. They're more likely to be able to buy that $700,000 house, put as much down as they can, knowing that 1, 2, 3 years from now, at some point in time, if they're still in that house, interest rates will go down, they'll refinance, then it'll all shake out, right? The economics of the refi game, y'all remember a year ago, marry the house, date the rate, marry the house, date the rate. Like that was the kind of calling card of lenders, like, hey, buy the house, and at some point the rates are going to go down and you can refi. True statement. The finances of that make total sense. The median buyer doesn't have the capacity quite as much as the double median buyer to take advantage of that. So where a lot of this inventory increase is coming is homes that are somewhere around the median that we would normally anticipate to move very quickly, and they're not. At least not in comparison to what we've experienced the last 2 years. Okay, so I think the most notable thing is that we are, for the first time, really since 2018, seeing a notable increase in inventory that's happening relatively quickly. Right, so this didn't happen in 19. This happened in 2020, but only for about 2 weeks in like March of 20, when the pandemic first broke out and everyone just froze and stopped buying. But that was less than 30 days, and immediately thereafter, inventory plummeted. So it did not happen in 21. It started to happen in late 22. But really, this is the first 2-week stretch where I've seen anything like this sort of inventory increase. Okay, so that's really notable. But let me give you a little bit of perspective here. This 2000 number, while it is a big jump, keep in mind, if we went back and looked at this number over the last decade, 2,000 would still be considered a very low number of single family houses for sale in the city of Indianapolis. Does that make sense? So it's not that 2,000's high. It's that for the inventory to have jumped by 500 houses in 2 weeks is high. 2,000 is actually still quite low in the perspective of a decade. A decent chunk of those 2,000 listed in the last 14 days, which what that means is our activity in the last 2 weeks was still about normal. You still saw 1,200 homes penned. So it's not like the market froze, but basically just as stuff's getting listed, it's not getting purchased quite as quickly as it's getting listed. This cumulative days on market have closed in the last 30. It's held pretty steady, but if I had to guess, and we could make a note of this here, with this inventory jump, what we'd anticipate to see is that like 30 or 60 days from now, this number will go up. The more houses there are for sale, the more slowly they will sell on average, right? Kind of common sense. I'd anticipate the days on market number to start to go up. We have 66 days of inventory. So even though our inventory is notably higher right now, we're still seeing pretty good activity. So our number of days of inventory is still notably lower than it was in January, February. Again, fairly normal. Okay, I'm going to make a hard turn here. And for 5 or 10 minutes, take a look at another lens at these two competing factors. So on one hand, you've got price. On the other hand, you've got unit count, right? So y'all see how these two things connect. And we have looked at this in the past. This is when you log into your MyBOR account and before you go to the BLC, remember that there is this, I can go into this market trends or market pricing. This is the market trends. I really like this tool. If you're ever looking to find kind of a helpful 1 or 2 data points, I think this is a great tool. And I want you to take a look at these two things. I think this is a good illustration of what we're talking about, because you hear chatter about like, how is the housing market doing? And sometimes I think the best thing to do when somebody asks that is to say, well, what do you mean? Because the housing market pretty much consists of price and unit count. So total volume in our industry, total volume would be average price times how many homes are trading hands. So those are the two biggest factors, right? Well, they're doing very different things, those two factors. Right here, median sales price. This is just a good look at this is all of MyBOR. This chart goes back to 2016. And reminder that every one of these years were considered good, healthy years in our marketplace. Every one of them, people were talking about how much prices were going up. Okay. So yeah, go back to 2019. And had you asked any realtor in 2019, well, I guess you can't say any realtor. If you'd asked most realtors in 2019, what's happening to prices? They'd say, oh, wow, we're seeing a pretty big increase, right? Well, in 2019, the highest our median price got was $197,995. Okay. Obviously, the pandemic hits. It kind of pours some gasoline on price increase. We get to 225. In 2021, we get to 255. In 2022, in June, we get all the way to 295. What happened in June of 2022? Interest rates start to go up, right? It did exactly what you would have anticipated. So we had seen this from 2019 to 2022, rapid price increase. Interest rates go up fast, the most that they have in a long, long time. It cools the price increase, but yet in the middle of what everyone is describing as a slow marketplace, in July, we set another record, right? We're at 299,900. not that long ago, 2019, I just want to give you all this reference point. Not that long ago, in June of 2019, we were at 197 and people were talking about how much prices were going up. 3 years later, 3 years in a month, we're at 299.9, and only because interest rates went up so much that it cooled the increase. Okay, now I'm going to look at the other number. So that was price. Here's closed sales. This is what we're feeling as realtors. Okay, so when people talk about the market, how's the market doing? Consumers oftentimes mean price, value. Is the value holding steady? Is it increasing? Is it going down? They're not as likely to mean transaction count. This is a really interesting data point that I don't want to be negative on this call. I think I just want to be realistic and say, I think this is what a lot of us as realtors are feeling right now. Notice that we peaked this year. The highest number of transactions we have had in a month was in June, which is very normal. It often peaks in June or July, and it was 3,340. Again, this is all of MIBOR. Okay. Well, go back and look at what the peak traditionally had been in unit count. 4,000, 4,200, 4,300, 3,900, 4,174, 4,300, 4,100. So the number of homes trading hands always peaks in the summer, June or July. And then it goes down, 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 usually to January, and then starts to come back up to June or July, down to January. It's incredibly consistent, the seasonal cycle of transaction count. But the big outlier here is interest rates cooled the price increase and it crushed transaction count. And so I think there's a couple applications of this for realtors. One of them is, if your transaction count is down, put that into context. Understand that most realtors' transaction count is down because the transaction count in the marketplace is down a little over 10%. Depending on how you're looking at it, it's actually, you could argue that it's down as much as 20%. Means for every 10 houses that were trading hands a year ago, 8 are trading hands now. That's a big deal. And it's fairly abnormal. Like, you look at the consistency over the last 7 years and you think, oh, wow, transaction count is down quite a bit. So that's market share kind of disappears. The other application of this, less about you and more about your relationship to your client, is that I think this is a helpful perspective, especially if you have some sellers where you're just trying to have honest conversations with them and say, hey, it's a challenging marketplace to price a house right now. And I think most consumers would probably understand this. It's challenging to price a house because on one hand, prices are still going up. We set the record in July, right? They're not going up as fast as they were, but we're still in a marketplace where they're going up, and sellers do still have more leverage in most transactions than buyers do, right? Remember that there's 2,000 houses for sale in Indianapolis. Yes, it's a big increase, but it's still lower than the decade-long average. Sellers have the leverage, prices going up. However, it's really hard to price right now because transaction count is the lowest it's been in a long time, and inventory is starting to go up. So there's some houses sitting on the market. Again, we talked about 20, 30, 40, 50 days. You've got sellers that are frustrated, right? They've built expectations off of the pace that we had observed for 3 years. It's logical. I don't think they're being unreasonable to kind of come into the process of selling thinking well, my neighbor's house sold in 2 days and it sold for this. So I think they've got reasonable expectations based upon what had been happening. Prices are still going up, sellers still have the leverage. But if transaction count is down this much and inventory is starting to go up, you're just going to see some homes sit more than we were accustomed to. Especially those homes that are somewhere close to the median. I think they're actually the hardest inventory to price right now. And in my opinion, I know there's sometimes, look, as a realtor, when you're talking to your seller, you want to be confident, you want to be definitive, you want to be perceived as adding value with great information and advice. So in an ideal world, you want to say to somebody, we priced this house at $399, it's going to sell for $385, and it should take less than 3 weeks. Right? You want to be that definitive. But I think sometimes the value add to them is to be honest and say, it's not that I'm uninformed. I'm actually very well informed. Because I'm well informed, I'm going to be honest with you and say that pricing your house right now is challenging. Because on one hand, prices are still going up. Leverage favors the seller. That's good news for you, Mr. and Mrs. Seller. But on the other hand, interest rates going up has worked. Inventory is increasing, days on market's increasing, and transaction count is way down. We're starting to see some houses priced at $399 sit on the market longer than we have in years. And so we want to take that into consideration for your expectations for the pricing strategy. And I think sometimes, like, hey, if the market's complex and it's got all this nuance and it's hard to figure out, I personally wouldn't advise a realtor to try to hide that from the consumer. I would show it to them. Perhaps these two charts might be a helpful, especially if you've got a client that you know is a little bit more data oriented. Maybe showing them these two charts is a good way. Like, even, I don't mean to patronize a client. That's not my intention here in this statement, but you don't have to be an economist to look at this chart right here and recognize that something unique is happening right now. Fair? Right? You may not necessarily know all the implications of what does it mean that there was 3,300 closed transactions in June. But you can tell really quickly that something is unique. Therefore, a realtor telling you that pricing the house is challenging right now, this can validate that. And I think it's honest. Okay, I apologize. I'm over time, but I want to show you two more things really quickly, and I'm going to send these out. I'm going to show you two articles that hit on these two things. I'm going to send these out later. So one of these is Zillow's effort to address this slowdown in transaction count. Y'all know that Zillow is they're a lender among many other things that they do. For a while they were a buyer. They're clearly a lead generator. They're a compiler of data, but they're also a lender. And for lenders, this is why your LO friends are not having a good year, right? Transaction count is a huge thing for lenders. They're getting no refi business and not as many houses are trading hands. If you're a mortgage originator, this is not good news for you. And also not good news for Zillow. They're now offering a 1% down payment program. I don't know if you saw this, came out about a month ago. I'm going to shoot a CNN article out later about it, but that is directly in an effort to address this low transaction count issue. So what they're saying is that we're going to try to find a way to sell more mortgages by alleviating the cash concern. So it's like, hey, we know interest rates are high, but maybe we can pull some buyers into the market by lowering the down payment requirement. I think it's a really interesting model. The CNN article that I'll send out, I think it does a good job of highlighting, like, hey, there might be some concerns about this, right? Like a really big lender lending 99% LTV across the country. They're also offering 2% closing costs assistance. So do the math there. Under that program, buyers are buying a house and walking away with money, right? It's interesting. I don't think it's bad news for buyers. I just think it's a really interesting play to see like what happens with that into the future. The second, and I'm going to share this article from The Economist, and we're going to wrap up with this. Sorry. There we go. Can y'all see that? I love a term in this article that I just recently came across. Y'all have probably heard this term more than me, but YIMBYs. It's kind of this trend of yes in my backyard as opposed to the NIMBY no in my backyard. But here's something that if you really wanted to zoom out and say, okay, wait a minute, if high interest rates slowed down price increase, but actually hurt affordability, what can possibly be done to help affordability? I think this article from The Economist does a really good job of laying out, well, there's really only one thing that can be done to truly help affordability, and it's more inventory. We have to add unit count. And most areas in the United States have been terrible at this. Zoning regulations make adding a lot of inventory very, very hard. In this article, it actually referenced, like, for example, the number of housing permits that had been issued in the county that San Francisco sits in relative to their population. And it's like, well, no wonder prices there are so high. It's essentially they're limiting supply. But I wanted to highlight this one paragraph here. Oops. Okay. In recent decades, house prices have outstripped income growth across the developed world. The reasons for this are numerous. Interest rates affect how much buyers can afford, as does income growth. Population changes, culture, and demography have all had an impact on demand, as do bank regulation, lending practices, and the like. But underlying it all is basic economic logic. Where demand outpaces the supply of new homes, prices tend to rise. So this gets a little bit more abstract. It's outside of your day-to-day. But if you're in conversations and you want to really kind of be able to add value and be an expert on this, when people are asking about, well, what can we do to actually help affordability? Y'all see that interest rates can't really do that. Because if interest rates go down, it just pours gasoline on price increase. So you're making it more affordable in one factor, but less affordable in another. If interest rates go up, yes, it slows price increase, but now the median consumer is paying 3 times the interest. So the home isn't more affordable, it's less. More inventory is the answer. I think this article lays out nicely how zoning regulations have either intentionally or unintentionally contributed to the affordability crisis. And so if you want to nerd out on this, I'll send this Economist article. This is a subscription, so I'll print this to a PDF and send it out, and then I'll shoot a link to the CNN article. I know that was a lot. Since I finished with The Economist and some of the less practical information, I'll just close by saying this. Pricing a home right now, I think it's the most challenging it's been in a long time. Going back to those 2 charts from the MIBOR market research tool, to say if prices are still essentially at record highs in central Indiana, but transaction count is way down, that creates a lot of nuance, a lot of complexity in pricing a house, especially at a median price. And I think your job as a realtor oftentimes is just to be honest with a seller about that and lay it out and think to yourself, if there's another realtor that comes into this picture that I'm competing with, If they happen to get this listing because they speak with definitive confidence about pricing the house, so be it. I think your job is to understand the information and be open with them about why it's a challenging marketplace to price a house right now. I think Rex and I try to say this every single week. If we can ever be helpful in one of those conversations, directly with you, directly with the client, let us know. We hopefully can add value to you in that way. Quite a few of you take me up on that. I love it when you do. So I would just encourage you anytime, shoot me a text, give me a call, let me know how we can help you think through this. Thanks for bearing with me through a lot of nerdy information today. We will send out the recording and a couple articles later. Go enjoy your Wednesday. Thanks, y'all.